Welcome. Welcome to Tiny Desk Worship for First Church and Parish in Dedham. I'm the Reverend Rali Weaver, and today is Sunday, May 2nd, 2021. We will be having the same worship on the green at 10 a.m. if you can join us. I will begin with our centering thought. It comes from the 1968 Kerner Commission. Discrimination and segregation have long permeated much of American life. They now threaten the future of every American. This deepening racial division is not inevitable. The movement apart can be reversed. Choice is still possible. Our principal task is to define that choice and to press for a national resolution. To pursue our present course will involve the continuing polarization of the American community and, ultimately, the destruction of basic democratic values. Again, that was written in 1968. It was part of the Kerner Commission report. I invite you to relax into our prelude, The Monk, by Valerie Capers, performed by Maria Corley on piano, from Soulscapes Albany Records, used with permission by Valerie Capers and the Oxford University Press. Here is a stewardship announcement I made this week. Please watch. Hi, it's Raleigh, and I'm talking to you from outside of First Church and Parish in Dedham in the rain because I'm fretting about our stewardship campaign. We have 30 more pledges to come in, so if you haven't pledged yet, please fill out the pledge card below me. And if you'd rather get a paper one, call the church office and we'll send you one. We need your pledges. We need about $960 from everyone else who needs to pledge. So some of you will need to pledge more and some less, but we need 30 more pledges of $960 or more to reach our stewardship goal, and we need it this week. So please fill out your pledge card so we can pay a livable wage to our groundskeeper who does a beautiful job with our church grounds, and also so that we can get Grace some help with an RE assistant next year. So please fill out your pledge cards. And even I raised my pledge a little bit this year so that I could help these dreams come to a reality. So I'm hoping you will too. We have many events coming up. First of all, this is the month of the Mother's Day Walk for Peace, and I hope if you haven't heard about it, you will read our all-church email and consider contributing and joining us for the walk and sending some pictures in. If you didn't sign up in time to get a t-shirt, mine is super extra large and I would love to give it to someone it will fit. So please consider signing up for the walk and you can get this t-shirt. We also have a twice monthly writers group coming up this week. We were supposed to write something that rhymes, so please consider joining us for that hilarity, and also consider writing something this week that rhymes. All the ways to get involved in our church are on our website. I now invite you to relax into our introit, Lift Every Voice and Sing by James and Rosamond Johnson, performed by our First Church Choir.
Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise, high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won.
Our opening words are Elephant in the Room by Christian M. Coley. Even Hannibal, riding on his elephant, would not emerge triumphant, although he occupied southern Italy, could not achieve a clear victory. Fabius Maximus knew his position and forced him to a war of attrition. So for every military shock and awe, there is an insurgent force that saw opportunity to persevere even when the victor should be clear. For example, during the American Civil War, the Union Army had 3 times more of the population on their side and more manufacturing industry by a wide margin. But it took 4 bloody years to win. And even if you win the war, you can lose the peace. Although the South had to release their slaves from legal bondage, with the KKK and Jim Crow still did manage to maintain separate but equal, so that war would have a sequel in the Tulsa Massacre and 100 other atrocities visited upon these. Second-class citizen, which accounted for 3/4 of a man, prohibited from voting by poll taxes and other schemes, burning, dragging, hanging, lynching scenes, so much strange fruit, the problem so acute that we're still dealing with it here today. Sesquicentennial gone by another black man lay, dead in the streets, at police officers' feet. And although the government has military and apocalyptic weapons, no match for freedom-loving daughters and sons of this American soil, there's no amount of money or oil that will stop our progress. Together fix this mess, one step at a time. Liberty Bell chime, truly for all. United we stand, divided we fall. I invite you to join with me in singing Where is Our Holy Church? Where is Our Holy Church? Hymn number 113. I light our chalice this morning for all the people who are still struggling and working towards progress and peace. And I light our green sanctuary candle for all the ways we strive to be a more sustainable congregation. Please say with me the unison affirmation as is printed in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, to serve humanity in love is our covenant with each other and with God. I'm going to ring our bell for our intergenerational message and ask our children to pay close attention. Well, today I just wanted to talk to you because I think it's important that we try to make sense of our world today and the golden rule. You all know what the golden rule is, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. I think the problem is that some people don't see their neighbors as anyone, any living thing. And I think that's where we need to start. If we could see the inherent worth and dignity of every human soul, of every being, of every breathing being, even of plants, I think we would have a very different world. But because some people see the inherent worth and dignity only of people who look like them, who speak like them, who believe like they do, and they only see those people as their neighbors, they sometimes can disregard or think less of someone less than them. And I think that's what we want to talk about today. That's what the Kerner Commission was looking at. And I want you to really consider how important it is to love every person, even people we don't like very much sometimes, because it's from understanding and from loving people that we can listen to hard truths and sometimes get past our differences and be more connected. So that's what I want you to think about today as we talk about the Kerner Commission. I invite you into a time of prayer and meditation. We will begin with the choir singing our musical meditation. We begin by breathing in peace and breathing out love. Breathing in peace and breathing out love.
Breathe out love.
Let us be grateful for all the silences in our lives so we may completely experience the sound. Our first reading is from the book Dissent by Ralph Young. Just days after President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act in August of 1965, a routine traffic stop in the African-American Watts neighborhood of South Central Los Angeles escalated into an altercation between Black residents and the police officer. The situation got out of hand. More police were called in, a bystander was clubbed, and scores of African Americans gathered around, taunting and threatening the cops. Years of anger at police brutality and resentment about exploitive white landlords exploded. For 5 days, Watts went up in flames. Hundreds of buildings and white-owned businesses were damaged or destroyed. Thousands were arrested. Hundreds were injured. 25 blacks and 9 whites were killed. The riot was only quelled after 16,000 National Guardsmen were deployed. But Watts was just the first of these inner-city rebellions. In 1966, there were riots in Cleveland and Chicago. In 1967, there were 8 major uprisings. Those in Newark and Detroit eclipsed Watts. In Detroit, 5 days of carnage left millions of dollars of property damage, 1,200 injured and 43 dead. In Newark, there were 725 injured and 23 dead, and also millions of dollars of destruction. President Johnson had to send in the Army and the National Guard troops to restore order. Johnson, like most white Americans, was shaken by the uprisings and appointed a commission to investigate the causes and to propose a remedy. White racism is essentially responsible, the Kerner Commission reported in 1968, for the explosive mixture which has been accumulating in our cities since the end of World War II. Blacks living in the inner cities have been excluded from economic progress in the United States. There is no opportunity for young people to escape. What white Americans have never fully understood, but what the Negro can never forget, is that white society is deeply implicated in the ghetto. White institutions created it, white institutions maintain it, and white society condones it. The Commission proposed numerous programs for federal, state, and local governments to initiate that would expand opportunities for ghetto residents to participate in the formulation of public policy and the implementation of programs affecting them through improved political representation, creation of institutional channels for community action, expansion of legal services, and legislative hearings on ghetto problems. Although Congress increased funding for welfare, the Commission's recommendations were never implemented, and before the year was out, the white backlash against civil rights demonstrations and what was perceived as a government that was too accommodating to Black America gave Richard Nixon the victory in the presidential election. I invite you to relax into our anthem, Billy's Song, by Valerie Capers, played by Maria Corley on piano, from Soulscapes, Albany Records, played by permission by Oxford University Press. Our second reading is an excerpt from Fault Lines by Kevin M. Cruz and Julian E. Zelsner. The findings of the Kerner Commission, as it was known, ultimately cut to the heart of Black people's frustration over the many problems arrayed against them, and was, just as importantly, to white ignorance of those same problems. What white Americans have never fully understood, but the Negro can never forget, is that white society is deeply implicated in the ghetto, it concluded. White institutions created it, white society condones it. The Kerner report offered a stark warning. To continue present policies is to make permanent the division of our country into two societies, one largely Negro and poor, located in central cities, the other predominantly white and affluent, located in suburbs and outlying areas. Despite the clarion call to address these lingering inequalities, there ultimately proved to be little political will to act. The report came as political winds in Washington shifted strongly to the right. President Lyndon Johnson, when in his final months in office, lacked the ability to act upon the recommendations. Instead, Johnson approved legislation that vastly expanded federal power over local law enforcement, helping to militarize the police in what he called the war on crime. Johnson's successor, Richard Nixon, meanwhile, ran as a law and order candidate who promised to bring calm to cities, not with new programs of government aid, but a renewed commitment to harsher policing. The urban riots revealed the limitations of liberal change and gave room to those who challenged the movement for integration. I invite you to sing with me the hymn 116, I'm on my way, I'm on my way. It does feel that our country has yet to learn the actual cost of white supremacy and racism, and that it continues to perpetuate the same patterns of disregard and abuse of Black and brown-skinned people that have long permeated our nation's history. Derek Chauvin's trial and conviction was a first of what I hope are many accountings to come. When we think of the prophetic voice of the 1968 Kerner Commission and the lack of follow-through by the legislature, it's easy to see that the road to justice is anything but smooth. Our schools may be more segregated than ever due to the pandemic. A Bloomberg Equality Watch from December 2020 reported consultants McKinsey and Company found that students of color in U.S. schools had fallen behind in math by 3 to 5 months because of the pandemic. White students trailed by only 1 to 3 months. A quarter of the kids do not have access to any kind of web-enabled device or broadband at home. We don't have separate white and black water fountains anymore, and bathrooms are not segregated, although we still have conflicts around the bathroom use for transgender students. We don't have different restaurants or whites-only neighborhoods, although even in liberal Massachusetts, some towns are predominantly white due to lack of affordable housing or public transportation systems. Is it any wonder that we still see anger and ire erupt in our streets when the so-called American dream is not accessible to a large majority of our Black and brown-skinned neighbors? I know I have been on a tear this year, striving in my sermons to dismantle racial preconceptions and to raise up Black and brown-skinned voices. My battle cry alone will never be enough to level the playing field in our country, of course. Equity won't be experienced until low-interest loans and grants for safe and affordable housing and free and fair education are made available to those who have been disenfranchised for generations. Until the infrastructure, including the schools and water systems in our cities, are made equitable, until no child is hungry or homeless in our country, all these things will require more than a few powerful readings and a sermon. According to the American Institute for Research, AIR, a staggering 2.5 million children are homeless each year due to poverty and insecure housing. Additionally, 700,000 children are taken from their family of origin each year due to reported abuse and neglect. In 2016, the Children's Bureau of Child Welfare noted the wide discrepancy between the number of white versus Native, Latinx, and Black-skinned children both homeless and being taken from their homes. They posited that this discrepancy was a result of 1, disproportionate and disparate needs of children and families of color, particularly due to the higher rates of poverty. 2, racial bias and discrimination exhibited by individuals, for example, caseworkers, mandated, and other reporters. 3, child welfare system factors, lack of resources for family of color, and caseworkers' lack of training. And 4, geographic contexts such as the region, state, or neighborhood that people live in. Now, just take into consideration the costs of generations of Black and brown-skinned children being taken from their families or homeless from a young age. Imagine the cost of generations of children being refused the care and nurturing of their birth families and launched into a child welfare system. Imagine the cost to the security of children to be homeless for portions of their childhoods and unable to call any place home. I am personally aware of the pitfalls of our child welfare system after taking care of my nieces a few years ago who were only 18 months and 5 years old when they were taken from my niece, their mother, by the Department of Children and Families in Connecticut. I will admit to some bias, but it is hard for me to imagine what good could ever come from taking a child, let alone an 18-month-old, from their mother without doing any interventions or offering support beforehand. Despite DCF's mission that states that neither poverty nor addiction will play a role in its decision-making to remove a child, I heard countless laments from family foster caregivers who told a different story. Lack of training, underfunding, and unexamined bias has led to a crisis in our American child welfare system. This has created an enormous discrepancy from state to state in both the quality of care of children in the welfare system and that they receive and the influence of undertrained and unmonitored child care workers employed by the state. When we couple the heightened number of Black and brown-skinned children in DCF care with the disproportionate number of Black and brown-skinned people who do not get a high school diploma or have access to affordable higher education, with those that end up in mass incarceration or are targeted by the police, we begin to see the costs of the systemic racism that the Kerner Commission warned us about back in 1968. And we are fooling ourselves if we do not think there is a great racial divide that is still, today, killing our American dream. So what can we, people of faith, do? Much of it we are doing or trying to do, but we need to continue the conversation about racially motivated wealth gap in our country. How long does this conversation need to go on? As long as any one of our neighbors is discriminated against or denied basic safety and security. This is in part why I encourage us each year to walk in the Louis D. Brown Mother's Day Walk for Peace. I want us to walk and raise some money for the Louis D. Brown Institute because I believe it is the one best way we can support those affected by the disparities caused by violence in our neighbors' homesteads. If you want to know more about this walk, watch my attempt to encourage your participation from last year on YouTube. Having open conversations, participating where we can to help solve problems created by systemic racism, even in fact, especially with those who disagree with you, is essential for keeping the concern alive until we finally find solutions. This week, I participated in a healing circle at Harvard Divinity School. I've decided to leave my role as the denominational counselor at the end of this year so I can spend more time with you all next year. A few of the divinity students had felt hurt by my attempts to offer them guidance over the past years, and the meeting on Friday was set up to be a chance for us to clear the air. Unfortunately, the students believed I already knew what I had done to upset them, and because I had not been approached but once in my tenure, I had little idea of what the core problem was. I bring this up in part because when there are intractable problems, avoiding them or refusing to talk directly with the people who are causing the discomfort is no way to solve an issue. The two issues that were raised were only hinted at in the meeting, and at the close, most students stated that they didn't feel heard and weren't satisfied with the process. I stayed in the room and stated that I would really like to know what it was that I'd done to hurt some of them, only to find out that they'd spent several meetings discussing the concerns with the dean of students without that information ever being shared with me. Sometimes we talk about issues instead of directly confronting the problem head on. Generally, the result is that very little changes but our minds. What is interesting about the 1968 Kerner Commission report is that it is an explicit document that spells out the problem of white supremacy the same problem we're still wrestling with today. In the end, what the students were upset at me for was that I had preached one sermon in February of 2020 about Angela Davis that they had felt was pro-police and called for police reforms instead of what they believed should be abolish the police force entirely. Without wanting to get into the efficacy of their concerns, I want to state that waiting a year and a half to have any open conversation about the concerns my sermon raised left little room for clarity or healing. When we let our wounds fester and refuse to address them directly, they often become larger and sometimes imaginable. This is something that the Kerner Commission report pointed out. Decades of violent policing practices, a dysfunctional justice system, racist consumer credit practices, poor and inadequate housing, high unemployment, and racially motivated voter suppression all converge to propel violent upheaval in the streets of African American neighborhoods, in cities, in the North and South, East and West. And as Black unrest increased, inadequately trained police officers and National Guard troops too often entered affected neighborhoods in ways that worsened rather than quelled the violence. The Kerner Commission was then formed in 1968 and directly stated, as our centering thought pointed out, that discrimination and segregation have long permeated much of American life. They now threaten the future of every American. This deepening racial division is not inevitable. The movement apart can be reversed. Choice is still possible. Our principal task is to define that choice and to press for national resolution. To pursue our present course will involve the continuing polarization of the American community and ultimately the destruction of basic democratic values. Born generations after this treaty was written and ignored by administration after administration, the Harvard Divinity School students, or at least some of them, feel a natural impatience for things to change and change right now. I, on the other hand, was born just before this report was written and have always felt a gentle urging for change and accepted that progress is often one step forward and two steps back. This, along with an impassioned plea I made to them after the last election to consider ministering in the South and the West, caused much of the tension that went unexplored due to an unwillingness to talk it through, and thus simmered to a festering point where the students see me as not only outwardly racist, but unapproachable and biased, and probably even a white supremacist. I say all this to raise the specter of how uncomfortable we may all end up feeling before the white supremacy that has pervaded our nation is abolished. I can and will say more about this leaving from Harvard and how it's affected me and what I've learned from that experience at a later date. I bring this situation up for us today simply to say that no matter how or when we dismantle this white supremacist culture, it will cause us all discomfort. And the longer we wait to do it, every day we put off having these conversations and accepting the truth of how racist and unachievable our outdated American dream really is, the more painful it will be for all of us, and the longer white supremacy will remain the norm. I'm proud of the current administration for addressing some of the needs of low-income families, including early education, childcare, and free post-high school education. How much of this will pass, or how long these changes and all the others, including changing us from a policed and child welfare country to a country in which each of us cares for our neighbor as ourselves, well, only time will tell. One thing I know for sure is that the more we know about our history, the more we wake up to the problems that have always been a part of the American experience, the more we can talk openly about white supremacy, the sooner we will reach the promised land of freedom and justice and liberty for all American people, not just the rich and light-skinned. I invite you to sing with me hymn number 153, "Oh, I Woke Up This Morning." And now, let us fix our steps so we stagger not in the uneven motions of this world, but go steadily on our way, neither censuring our journeys by the weather we meet or turning aside from anything that might befall us. Amen.
Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought.